Hi, my name is Chris Kennedy, Cloud Architect with Pure Storage. Today we're going to take a look at migrating Kubernetes applications between different clusters using Portworx by Pure Storage. So I've set up two clusters to work with. The first is a Red Hat OpenShift cluster, and this is running version 4.99, which is based on Kubernetes 1.22. And then our second cluster is a Google Anthos cluster. You'll see it here, CK Anthos, and it's actually built on 1.21. All of the instructions for everything I'm doing are available on our documentation site at docs.portworx.com. Right here, I have my Google Anthos cluster, and I can get the nodes. And we'll see that we have 6 nodes in this cluster. And if I get namespaces, we'll see that we have PX migrations as a namespace. Now that's going to be our admin namespace for migrations. With Stork, which is Portworx storage-aware scheduler extension for Kubernetes, we're able to create an admin namespace, and that's what PX Migrations is. And with an admin namespace, I can create a cluster pair in this namespace, create migrations here, and be able to move applications from any namespace within the cluster. So the namespace is here. The next step is to set up the cluster pair. Now, with this being Google Cloud, the authentication uses my personal Google account, and that is not what I want in a Kubernetes cluster. So we're actually going to create a service account and give it cluster admin roles. So if you take a look, I've created a manifest here, migration account, and we're creating a service account named PX Migrations in that PX Migrations namespace. And then we're creating a cluster role binding for it to have the cluster admin role. And we'll go ahead and execute that against our Google cluster. And so now that we have a account that has the proper permissions, we can then use the shell script provided in the Portworx documentation site to generate a kubeconfig file to use for this account. So we'll take a quick look at that. So we are looking for service account PX migrations in the namespace PX migrations, and these are just variables we're setting up to use in this lower component. But if you take a look at the lower portion, this is the exact schema for the kubeconfig file. So I'll go ahead and save those changes, and then we can come over. Let's make sure that is executable, and it is. So we can do, and we'll get a config file for the PX Migrations user account. Now, I had done this previously, so if we take a look, I actually have that right here, and we can check and the tokens match. So now that I've got that, I can actually do an export kubeconfig equals my file. And so now I'm operating on the cluster as that service account. And the next step is to create a cluster pair. So we will do stork_cuttle generate cluster pair, and I'm going to name this Anthos in PX migrations, and we're going to have that output to a file called clusterpair.yaml. So we can actually, now that that's run, we can come over, take a look at that clusterpair.yaml, and notice that it is set up to use the cluster pair named Anthos, the migrations, but we still have some information to fill in here. So we need to provide one of the IP addresses for one of the nodes in the cluster. We need to provide the port number, and we need to provide the cluster token. Now, to get the cluster token, we just need to run pxctl status in one of the Portworx pods. So let's get that. This is my Portworx cluster pod, so I'll copy the name of this first one. And then we can do run pixyctl status on it. And we can get the cluster UUID, which we are going to need. And we'll just copy that. And I will put that into a notepad here so I have it. And then we also need our cluster token. And so we'll copy that cluster token. So that we have it. Now we can come back to our cluster pair manifest, and under the options here, we will insert our IP, any of these IP addresses. So I'm going to pick number 11 here. And we will put that into here. Port is going to be 9001. And then we want to add that token. And this allows us secure and authenticated access between the two clusters. And so let me grab that token real fast. Paste that in. And then we can save that file. Now, I've generated the cluster pair on the destination cluster. However, I want to create the cluster pair on the source cluster. So our source cluster is over here, and this is our OCP cluster. So if I do OC get nodes, so that creates our cluster pair, and then we can do stork_ctl get cluster pair in px migrations, and we'll see that stork has successfully paired both the storage as well as the schedulers between these two clusters. And now I have an object in this namespace called Anthos, which represents a path from the OCP cluster to the Anthos cluster. I have deployed an application already. So if we look in, I deployed Postgres, and I put it in the Postgres namespace. So if we look at what's been created there, we'll see that we have a Postgres pod running, and its service, the deployment, all of the things you would normally expect. However, we can also get the PVCs. And we'll see that I've got a data PVC of size 2 gigs already created for this database pod. So let's go ahead and create a database and put some data in it. So we created a database named pxdemo, and now we'll just use pgbench to put some data in it. And that should have created about 800 megs of data or so. So we can go ahead and check here on that by running a df. And we can see we've got 805 megs of data. And we should have about 5 million rows in that database. And we'll see we've got the 5 million rows. So now that we've got data in this database and it's ready, we want to move it from OCP into the Anthos cluster where it will live for production. To do that, we can simply create a migration manifest. So if I come back to my editor, then we can come down to here and look at what a migration would look like. So basically we're just using the Stork API. We're creating a migration of Postgres in that PX migrations namespace. Notice that we reference the Clusterpair Anthos, which is already there, and we're telling it to go ahead and include all of the resources and start the application. So with that in place, I can go to that folder and we can apply that. Before I do that though, let's over here start a watch kubectl get all in Postgres. And so that'll create the migration. And over here we'll do a watch stork kettle get migrations in px migrations. And at this point we'll see the migration in progress. So we'll give this a few minutes. So we'll go ahead and break out of the watch on GCP and see that our pod is running, service is here, everything's in place, and then we can go ahead and check the data as well. And there's our 5 million rows. And we'll use the crew plugin dfpv in the Postgres namespace. And we'll see 819 megs was moved over. And we're at about 42% used. So there you have it. We were able to migrate that Postgres database, the pod, and all of the components that make up the application from OpenShift over to Anthos. For more information, simply visit portworx.com or purestorage.com/Portworx.